All right, so here we are, Wayne Andrus. So this is a show just to kind of highlight the story of people that normally their story isn't out there. And not that not a lot of people know you. You're pretty legendary here in Corpus Christi. But the idea behind the title of our podcast is, the title is Peculiar People, and it comes from 1 Peter chapter 2. And it says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you may show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And so that peculiar people. And I like it because I just think we should always embrace our weirdness.
Yeah.
Normal's boring, right?
I agree.
So anyways, but it literally means in this world we are peculiar because we've been called to something different. The world shouldn't really understand us and recognize us. So that's where that comes from. So anyways, for you to know, Wayne Andrus, he's been a friend of ours for my wife and I, and he and his wife for 20 years, probably at least. And one of the things about Wayne, just to set him up, is when I first met him, I couldn't imagine that someday he would be a missionary because our kids were playing basketball together, and you taught me how to yell at the refs.
I've asked for forgiveness now.
Yeah. I had to repent. It was a time of backsliding in my life. No, just kidding. But it was a really fun time just getting to know you back then. And yeah, you were in a sense what I would call a good old boy, a good man, and a hard worker, contractor, and just always amazed me, people that can do things with their hands and get things done like that. And so I had a lot of respect for you, but I just kind of, I knew you loved the Lord and everything, and you wanted your kids to love the Lord as well. So we became friends. But got to know some things about you. So we're gonna dig deep here with you and go all the way back to when you were very young, because a lot of people, don't progress in their Christianity or may throw up an excuse or feel like they have a reason not to walk strong with God because they have a rough background. But why don't you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so I can remember back as early as 5, 6 years old, I would be running the streets and stealing bicycles and just acting like a little heathen running around the city. And my mom and my family, they weren't really parents. And I remember even getting drunk and doing drugs and all these kind of things before I was even 10 years old. Mm. And so I was taken from my mom from CPS and put into foster care. And, at age 11, I was adopted into a family. And
so how much time did you spend in foster care?
I spent about 2.5 years in foster care. Now, the family that I call my adopted family, they never actually legally adopted me. I adopted them, they adopted me without the paperwork. So
Right.
I was really in foster care all the way until I was,
Oh, okay.
18 years old. And so, yeah, I was a non-believer. I was into this beautiful home. I'd say that being taken from my mom and put into this home was probably the second most amazing day of my life, and later on I'll share with you the first. I grew up I in this home and went and did sports and stayed off of drugs and stayed off of alcohol and all of these things. But when I became 18, moved out on my own, all of my young life clashed with my adult life. Right. And so when I was 19, 20, and 21, I got back heavily into drugs and alcohol. And doing those things, at that time, my parents moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. And
Where were you before this?
I was in Kansas.
Kansas, okay.
Yes, Manhattan, Kansas, Junction City, Kansas. I was living there, and it was a terrible life. It was a nightmare. I had a lot of anger, had a lot of terrible things going on that I was doing to people, and these are things that I was done to me and my family growing up, and now I was doing them to other people.
So you were still in Kansas,
Right.
when you were 18 and you moved out.
Right. And so 18, actually my parents, they moved to, my dad was in the military. My adopted parents were in the military. And my dad and my mom and family moved to Alaska my last year in high school. And so I moved out on my own, and man, the minute I moved out on my own, it turned really bad.
Okay, so we'll put a little pin mark in that, then
Right.
moving to Corpus. But, you know, so you were introduced to Christ in your foster home.
I was now.
Not being saved,
Not
but you
really.
were introduced to the church or
Right.
or faith.
I was
through your
going. Yeah,
parents.
I was going to church with my foster parents. We were playing church. We weren't really following the Lord. It wasn't until much later when I made a decision for Christ, and then I was following the Lord that, then things began to really, really change in my life.
Right. So when you moved out on your own, this faux faith and the goodness, relative goodness of your parents, compared to other humans, kept you out of trouble, but that wasn't enough to calm or divert your flesh.
Right. Yeah. So it wasn't until, I was doing these bad things in Kansas, and then I moved to Corpus Christi when I was 21.
Because they were stationed here now.
Yeah, they had moved here, and so I was actually running from the things in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my friends were getting in trouble, and I really did want to change, but I came to Corpus and found it all here.
Right. Yeah. Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah, and so I found all the bad here also, and I'd met my wife after I moved here. And she had enough of me because I was not a good person, and so Tammy actually left me. And at the time when she left me, but let me back up. Before that, I was running through a lot of trouble, and so I was going to move back to Kansas. And so I went to Flower Bluff Baptist Church. Because my parents were there, and I wanted to say goodbye to them.
Was it Waldron Road, or was it
Waldron Road?
Waldron Road Baptist, right?
And no, it's Flower Bluff. It was the other way towards the base.
Okay.
And so that day, I accepted Jesus Christ. And so I left that church. I didn't leave town. I stayed here. And but it wasn't until about a year after that, after I met Tammy, and after she was sick of my ways, and I was sick of living that way, that I said, you know what, I'm tired of this. And so then I started going to PADAP, Palmer Drug Abuse Center, and different places to get help. And I was going to these different places with Pete Pinto, a really good friend of mine. And, I was going to these places, and we were talking to everybody at these meetings about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't enough, those meetings. I felt like I needed more. And so that's when I walked into the church and then really poured my heart and life into the church.
Yeah, I would say, so many of us have experienced that. Even though my experience is completely different than yours, had great parents and loved the Lord, raised in the church. I always like to say I was a kid with scripture on my diapers,
Yeah.
and just had great parents. But, in my life, you had that influence, that good influence of good people, and that kept you out of trouble for a while, right? So for me, I had faith, and I had a good family. But what happened for me is I just realized that, just for me, when I hit junior high, the faith that I'd gotten in at 8, 9, 10 years old, 11 years old, was not enough to handle the junior high pressures. So then ninth grade, I recommitted my heart to the Lord the summer before 10th grade, and smoked a lot of pot and rebelled. But then through high school, I was the Bible thumper, dragging kids to church on Thursday nights in my van, and my parents' van. And, it was a great, sweet time. But as I got older, now I'm a man, and now the temptations are new. And then I go off to college, and my faith hadn't grown enough to face the temptations of the world, and so and even though you're changing, right, your habits through drug and alcohol ministry and even evangelizing, you're not filling yourself up enough, right, to handle the pressures. And so you just know you need more, right? And it's just people don't think that. It's like, I'm saved, that's it, we're good.
Yeah, no, it's you have got to work out your relationship with Christ daily.
Yeah.
You have to really spend time with the Lord. And when I first got saved and I walked out of the church, I didn't know what it meant. What did it? I knew I was saved. I knew I was a believer, but I didn't know what it meant to follow Him.
Right.
To truly follow Him. And I met Pete Pinto, a really good friend of mine, and at PADAP, Palmer Drug Abuse Center, and he began to disciple me and walk through life with me. And he had gone through a lot of the same things that I had gone through, and through that process, I began to think, I need more than this. And so that's when I walked into the church, and I came into the church, long hair, and walked into the church, and every time that they had an event, I didn't care if it was an old people event, a youth event, a kid event, I was at that church.
Oh, yeah.
I was there every time that the doors were open. And just watching people like that, Herb Fondren and Pete Pinto, and these guys mentored me, and they helped me to know what it meant to really follow Christ. And
let's stop there for a second, because this is something I've been thinking about a lot, just for years now, and really, because as a pastor, people look at you, and they come on Sundays and they consider that mentoring.
Yeah.
And a healthy church is where people minister to people, and they're involved in people's lives, right? That's where things change, is when you're living life with other believers alongside of you, right? And the church is some place where we find these people, but that willingness to open up. And, you hear people say, well, I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. True. Salvation on the cross did not include, believe and go to church.
Right.
But writer of Hebrews tells us it's super important. Why? Because we spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And the community of the church is where you saw the difference.
That's right.
And it's not, and I'm going to diminish the role of pastor. Pastor has a very important role, but it's the community of the body.
Right.
And really in my life too. I don't remember exact things I heard as a kid when I was backslidden or whatever the pastor said. But there's definitely people in our stories that we remember.
That's right. That's true.
And they make a huge difference.
Yeah.
So.
And I think about Pete Pinto and Herb Fondren. Those are two guys that really had a huge impact in my life. And
well, you know what I love about that?
Yeah.
They're getting credit for what you're doing now.
Amen.
And
they're with Jesus right now, both of them.
Yeah, they're still getting credit.
Amen.
We have so many pilot students that come through, and we get them at a good time. They're 24 to 26 years old, and they're getting back serious with the Lord. And they're starting to get married and kind of leaving the old life behind. But they're only here for a short time. But I always tell them, when you go, do good, because I want all the credit I can get in being that little part of your life, And it's so important to, just to emphasize that. Now, okay, for you guys to know that are listening or watching this, Wayne's a great guy, but he married a model.
That's right.
Right, and he, he's a go-getter, down to earth. And he married a model that
way out of my league,
way out of his league. But she's also kind of a little bit of an angel and kind of like a hippie in her niceness.
Yeah.
And it's like yin and yang. Even though I don't believe in that whole yin and yang thing, but your relationship's very different. Tell me about meeting Tammy and how you captured this beauty queen.
Oh wow! I wasn't always this not so handsome. I was kind of handsome, I think, at one time. Just kidding. So during that time that I was a believer, but I wasn't following the Lord.
Right.
I had met Tammy, and I actually met her at Booters, a country bar.
Right.
And And it was the first time I was actually the only time in the whole time that I was sober.
Oh.
And I'd met her at this place. And anyway, she left, and I didn't see her for a whole nother year. And then one more year later, I saw her, and I just happened to be sober again. And it's like 2 times in 2 years
That must
on the
be
same
God.
day that I met Tammy at Booters. And it was the same place, same situation.
Now, was she saved at this time?
No.
No. Okay.
And so I met her, and then after that second time, I began to call her and talk to her, and we began dating. But she very quickly realized that I had a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so after quite a while, she did leave me. And so then at that point, I was like, man, I need help.
Mm-hmm.
And not because I was trying to get her back, because I really wanted help. I wanted my life to change.
Right.
And so that's when I walked into the church, and that's when I began to really pour into my relationship with Christ.
Oh, that is so key. I'm glad you said that, because so many times we deal a lot with marriages, right? And so many times a man will show up here broken, and he wants to get right with the Lord to get his wife back.
That's right.
Instead of getting right with the Lord because he's the Lord.
That's right.
Amen.
That's exactly it.
And the thing is, our wives and women in general can perceive things and know if we're being honest about it or true, or we're actually changing, or we're just trying to manipulate them into being back with us. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And so at that point, after she had left, and I was just at the end of my rope. I didn't want to live like this anymore.
And how old are you at this time?
And I was 22.
Okay.
About 22 and a half. And so then she left me, and so then I was like, I'm done. I need to do something. So then I walked into church. And when I walked into the church, the first person I seen was Herb Fondren. And then he just took me under his wing and walked with me through life.
And was he an elder at the church? Or?
Yeah, he was a deacon at this particular church.
Nice.
And just a great all-around guy. But so I was working on my relationship with the Lord and walking through life. And Tammy had left me. She had gone off. And I'd seen her out in public a few times, and she saw change happening. She saw change happening. And so we began talking just a little bit. And then one time I had asked her over for lunch to my parents' house. And she came over for lunch. And at this time, I was on fire for the Lord.
Right.
I was telling everybody about Christ, and I was heaven or hell, brother.
Yeah.
And so Tammy came over to my house for lunch that day. And I said, if you die today, you're not going to be in heaven.
Wow.
And she left my house after lunch that day. And on her way back to work, she pulled over on the side of the road and made a decision for Christ that day.
Nice.
And so ever since then, we've been together, and we've been, following the Lord. And, if you look back on when we got married, people would say, I don't know how they're going to make it.
Right.
I don't know how they're going to make it. And Tammy would be the first to tell you she didn't know how we were going to make it either.
Right.
But through Christ, through our relationship with Jesus, through working out our relationship with him, both of us individually as a family, we just celebrated 30 years in January.
Nice.
And so to answer your question, God gave her to me. Right. God gave her as a gift to me. Mm-hmm. And so she's wonderful. She's just, wonderful. Mm-hmm. So thankful for her, and thankful for how we minister together, and she ministers to me, and I'm able to minister to her, and as God ministers to both of us together.
Right.
Just incredible.
So, I've always known you as a guy that would flip houses or, apartment complexes, whatever. So how did you get into that world? And
well, I began doing construction in Kansas before I came. And then I came to Corpus, and then immediately when I got to Corpus, I would work for a construction guy here in Corpus. And, just I was always high or wasted or whatever. And I had wanted at that time to start doing a work on my own. And but God He never opened that door for me. And so then all these things happened, and then I started following the Lord. And then I was going to Del Mar, and then while I was going to Del Mar, I was just doing little side jobs, little fence here, this there, and this there. And then by the time I got almost done with my first year of college at Del Mar, I was working full time doing construction. People were calling me all the time, and I was doing construction, and when I got done with that first year, I was like, man, I'm making way more money over here than I'm ever going to make when I graduate college.
Right.
And so then I began to do construction full time. And so I didn't have parents to teach me how to do construction. I always say that God gave me the gift to build. Mm-hmm. God gave me that gift because I didn't have any teachers.
Right.
And so he gave me the gift to be able to build and to remodel and to business and to be able to be a leader. Mm-hmm. He gave me those gifts. And so
so what about the like within the construction world, and it's rough out there. Whenever we were building the radio station, we were building this building here, and I had to call contractors and the city and everything, and man, it's a rough world. Yeah. They'd all be just cussing at me and everything. I go, look, I was a surfing judge, a school teacher, and now I'm a pastor. And then they just start confessing their sins, and their language cleared up, and then they start giving me stuff to give penance. But I mean, like, I'm just like, this is rough. But the guys that do it well, and one of my good friends, influential friends in my walk with the Lord when I was much younger, he's a construction guy, but he does it well. Like talk about that, like, light in the dark place. Like, that. How that is. And
yeah, well, a lot of my early construction days I was learning myself. And so, but I would always try, and we would, on the back of my business card I would have Psalm 127 1 and 2, and it says, unless the Lord builds a house, the builders labor in vain.
Nice.
And so I really believe that. And, I did have some pretty not so great employees that I would walk through sometimes with, and I would minister to them, and I'd walk through with them and talk with them. And some of them, they left the same way they came. But I do believe that some of them, were able to grow closer to the Lord.
And when you put it out there, now your clients know you're a believer too.
Yeah.
So you better not rip them off. You get judged by them, and then you get judged by God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, we didn't rip anybody off, and I actually probably didn't charge enough to most people. But we always ate. We always had peace at night. We always slept well.
Yeah.
And we didn't have many callbacks. We would always make sure that we did the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, again, I just think about the church. Sometimes we come and observe, and the professionals do that stuff, but every person's calling is just as important as a pastor's calling. Pastor doesn't run into these people. You do.
That's right.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm in people's homes.
Right.
I've had to tell people when I'm in their homes before, excuse me, guys, I don't have counseling in my contract. So I'm going to step outside while you and your wife get this figured out, and then I'll come back.
Right.
And, it was kind of funny, but a lot of times that would lighten the mood, and we'd move on from that. But but you're dealing with people in their homes. Yeah. And a lot of my customers were Christian, but a lot of them were not.
I remember working in a warehouse in Southern California, and in the job that I did when I was first married, I was out of the country for 6 months, and I was working, and then I was home. I was not working, so it's like, I'll just pick up some extra money. So I went to a temp agency, so I'm working as a temp in this big old warehouse, BMW warehouse, and there's like 120 guys on the floor, the receivers and then the pickers, and then there's a few packers, and just rough characters, But it was so funny because I remember sitting out in the parking lot and just going, God, I'm the least paid person here. I'm not in their union, but what are you going to do with me? I want to watch you work.
Amen.
I only worked there 2 months. I had guys calling me at home. I was doing marriage counseling. I'd only been married like a year or two, and I'm doing marriage counseling on the phone. It's like people don't realize if you go out there and you're a peculiar person, ministry is just waiting to happen.
That's right.
It's like the Christian life is boring. No, try it.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, my life as a Christian is not boring.
Yeah.
There's no boringness in my life.
Yeah.
I tell you what, do you just make yourself available?
Right.
You step out. God, you see where God's moving and join Him.
Right.
And you just make yourself available. Just be there and watch God move. It's just amazing.
So now before we get to the most interesting part, which we'll bring up at the end, being friends with you for all that time and you not being in our church was a blessing for us, right? Because it's really important for pastors to also have friends that are outside of the church. We love that, and we didn't get together often enough, but we would see you, and our kids and homeschool and just different things around town, and that was always a blessing to us. And we always enjoyed that. And then you showed up at our church one day. We're like, uh-oh,
what's he doing here?
Is our friendship going to change? But the other part of that is we got to watch you, and unfortunately, it sours a lot of people in church. But we got to watch you go through some really rough times with churches.
Yes.
And you held on to your faith, and
That's
you still
right.
believe that the church overall is a blessing. So
Yes.
tell me a little about some of those trials in churches.
Oh, wow.
You don't need to mention names
I
and
don't,
places,
how
but
do
you
I
can
even
just
say
mention
that?
situations, and some will pick up and they know.
We've had some situations in church where, we've been really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We were at one church and we were real young, baby Christians, and it had a church split, and we weren't planning on leaving that church, but the way the pastor handled himself that evening at this meeting that was presented, we felt like God was not at that meeting, and so God led us away from that church. And we visited several churches after that.
So that situation, if I'm right, it was kind of, the situation was my way or the highway.
Right.
And you took the highway.
I took the highway, but I wasn't planning on taking the highway. But at that meeting, the way that the pastor and the people that were leading that charge handled themselves, in my opinion, in not a biblical way. Mm-hmm. And so, and my family, we're young. And we left that church, and we visited around, and there was this one church we did not want to go to because a lot of people went to that church that was part of that split.
And you were avoiding us like the plague.
And no, I wasn't avoiding you guys. I was avoiding this other place where all these people that had left that church went to, and it was way across town from where we lived, and God kept telling us, no, I want you to go over there, and I'm like, I don't want to, Lord, but after a while we conceded and we did what the Lord wanted us to and went over to that church. And then after we were there for several years at that church, I was the chairman of deacons there, and big part of leadership there. And we had there was another church split that happened there, and a lot of people do some things that are just, I just don't, when we get our focus off of the Lord and we start focusing on our own wants and our own things that we want to do, then our focus is misplaced.
Right.
And because of that, we ended up leaving that church. And after that, we kind of helped with starting a church and doing some mission works and things like that. And in that interim time, we had gone to Kenya, and then we really felt like God was calling us to. Okay,
before we go over that waterfall and that flood of the cool things God's doing
now,
let's just back up a little bit, because I knew the pastor a little bit about that second church, and he was just a sweet guy.
He's the
nicest
nicest
a good guy
ever. Yeah.
Like you say.
He's
say
a
people
great
get their
friend of
eyes
mine.
off the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And even this morning, we're going to be remodeling our sanctuary and stuff, and just want to make sure everybody's on board and everything else. At the same time, I know that if our eyes are on the Lord, it doesn't matter what color the carpet is.
That's right.
Or even if there is carpet.
The foundation.
Unless
Unless the Lord builds a house.
And it's so hard because you see just the ugliness and the shame is when I watched that, and I was brokenhearted for the pastor.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm sure he wasn't perfect in everything, and I know things happen. I try not to blame it on everybody else. I want to learn in that situation, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it got to the point of lawsuits and threats of lawsuits and all kinds of bizarre stuff, and that's just
I was being
so
sued
unfortunate.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was being sued.
But you survived.
Yeah. This particular
church.
pastor is still today one of my great friends, and anyway, so yeah, we were being sued, and I get a message when I'm in Kenya, and they're like, "Oh, it's over. This lawsuit's over, and everything." I'm like, "Well, I didn't even know it was still going on,
Right.
And so anyway, yeah, it was kind of but it split the church. It just really did a lot of damage, Both of those church splits that I was a part of did a lot of damage.
Yeah.
It really did. And I you begin to think, well, was I part of that? You start to question your own things, when these things
introspection
happen.
is good.
Yeah.
But self-hatred or just destroying yourself is not good.
Yeah, no.
And some people do that, or just some people get disillusioned and walk away instead of growing.
Well, I know that there's people today that were part of both of those things that are not in church anymore.
Right.
That are not going to church.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy in that.
And the hard thing is we're not supposed to follow church. We're supposed to follow the Lord.
Exactly. If
And
God calls you into a church,
Yeah.
God calls you into a ministry, He needs to be the one calling you out.
Right.
And so, and both of those places, we felt God calling us in, and we definitely felt God calling us out. And so it wasn't that we didn't know that God wanted us to do the coming in or out. So
Yeah. I would say, trust in the Lord. No church is perfect. If you notice
right.
problems, be the solution instead of
Exactly.
a greater problem.
Yeah. And when you for us, we knew a lot of the problems because we were in leadership, but each a family, you're going to have troubles. You're going to have trials, and you're going to have things, and so you just need to work through those together.
Yeah. And even as a pastor, I've had my heart broken by those that I in error put on a pedestal too high.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all about mentors, but you can't let them even touch the hem of the robe of the glory of Jesus in your life first and foremost, right?
That's right.
And so I needed those mentors, and I was disappointed, but I wasn't destroyed because the Lord at that time just said, okay, it's time to put your eyes back on me.
Right.
Because we so tend to try to find our footing in someone on earth instead of heaven. And I think there's many reasons for that, but He's holy, we're not. And so the closer we get to the holiness, it's like, oh, I'm not so great as I thought I was, or whatever. But
that's so right.
Anyway, so now transitioning to the exciting part of what you're doing.
Amen.
Is we're watching you kind of go through this, and you're in this church that it seemed like a healthy place, but it never kind of took off and had a really good root, right? So you had good people there and everything, but it just, for whatever reason, God had something else going on in this other little church plant. And I knew your pastor just from a few conversations. He seemed like a sweet guy, but there's, I don't know the wholeness of it. I think that church eventually dissolved, or
they joined another church fellowship, and that church fellowship, that's the one where we told them we were gonna leave because we felt called to go to Kenya, and we wanted to be released from that.
Kenya.
Yeah.
So we're watching your life, in contact with you a little bit here and there. Our kids are older now, and seeing you at events like every Christian in our city does. We see each other a lot. But all of a sudden, this guy Wayne that I used to yell and get the refs mad at us at our girls' basketball games is called to
Kenya.
To Mombasa, Kenya, of all places. It's not Nairobi. A lot of people are in that area, but to this obscure place, not obscure to us, on the coast of Africa, all the way across the world. So tell us about that call and what the draw was.
Yeah. So when we were at the last church I was talking about that split, my daughter Amber and I and my wife, we watched. We had some missionaries that came from Kenya to our church.
Oh, trouble's coming, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. They came to our church, and you know, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, man, that'd be nice. We need to do that sometime. You know that. What'd you think of that, Amber? I think it was Amber and I were driving home.
So Amber, your older daughter.
Yeah, she's going to be 30 this year. Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, she had said, you know, Dad, I'm, you know, we've talked about doing things like this, but I'm ready to do this. I want to do this. And so really we went to Kenya in 2011 because Amber wanted to go to Kenya. And she kind of challenged me to go. And so I booked a ticket for me and Amber and Tammy to go to Kitale, Kenya, which is like 6 hours east of Nairobi. And so we went there, and it was hard. Mm-hmm. The food was terrible. You know, the mosquitoes were thick. It was hot. It was just, you know, we were spoiled Americans,
right,
is what it was. And so we were there 2 weeks, and we get back from Kenya, and my wife, you know, we're like, oh, we're back. We're done. And so we're like, okay, we did that. We're good. And so we get back, and God starts speaking to my wife over on this side of the house, and God's speaking to me on this side about Kenya missions.
Right.
And we go out on a date about a month later, and I asked my wife, I said, what would you say if God told us to go to Kenya? And she said, what? God has spoke to me a month ago about this, and I was just waiting for him to speak to you, for you to come talk to me about it. Mm. And so both of us, we just had like a fellowship, and it was an amazing time of us talking about Kenya. And so then we began to pray about it, and about a month or so later, we felt like, okay, God's calling us to Kenya. Mm-hmm. And so we started to sell all of our stuff in America. I had 2 businesses at the time, and we got out of the businesses and just put everything on hold and began to prepare to go to Kenya. And so during that time, God shut the door in Kitale, the place that we were going to go to,
right,
and opened a door in Mombasa. And the way that he did that was Willow was at a basketball game in San Antonio. My wife was at this game.
So Willow's your younger daughter.
Yeah, Willow's my younger daughter, my
middle daughter,
third born actually.
Yeah.
And so my wife was at this game, and she was telling everybody, "Oh yeah, we're going to Kenya. We don't know where we're going, but we're going to Kenya." And so this guy said, "I would like for you to can I tell my pastor about you?" Mm-hmm. And she said, "Sure, whatever God says." And so he told his pastor, who was in San Antonio, and the pastor told his friend that's in Kenya, and his friend in Kenya called us in Corpus from Mombasa.
Right.
And so we got to talking to him. He said he's coming back on furlough, and this was 2013 by the time this happened. And so he's coming back on furlough, and so would we want to come up and maybe just see if this would be maybe a fit? So my wife and I flew over there, and we met with him, and we were there a couple weeks with him and his wife in the ministries, and we prayed about it, and God said yes. Mm. And so when we went to Mombasa, we moved into his ministries. We ran 2 schools, water well ministry, feeding programs, starting churches. This is what we did for a whole year, the first year in 2013. So that's how we became in Mombasa.
Right.
Yeah.
So when did you, with the young men, really didn't have a place to go, and you started working in that ministry? What year did that start?
That was 2013.
Okay.
So what it was is that Amber and Willow, Amber my second born and Willow my third born, we were in Kenya with Haven also, who was 4.
Yeah.
She's 4 years old. We're in Kenya, and
so you got three girls.
3 girls in
Mombasa,
Kenya. Yeah, and
you fit in really well there.
Yeah, we did. And so we met this ministry called Rafa House for Kenya in that first year, and the founder of that organization invited Amber and Willow to come to fellowship with them in this street ministry, Rafa House street ministry. And so Amber and Willow went, and of course I'm going because I'm not letting my kids go anywhere without me, especially in Mombasa, Kenya, or any third world country. And so I took them over there, and we just began to know them, began to get involved with them and spend time with them. And so then we began to work with Rafa House Kenya. And we still are connected with these guys. Even today, a lot of them that were from that house still serve with us in our ministries. Nice. And it's just incredible.
Oh, that's the beautiful thing about your ministry, that, you're here and the locals are running your ministry out there. And that's discipleship.
That's right.
When you can believe and trust that you've trained them well.
Yes.
And God's done a work in them, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, so that's awesome, and that keeps you from total burnout.
Yeah, it does. And so, in Kenya, we have an apartment, which is kind of about 15 minutes away from where we do ministry. I mean, we do ministry everywhere, all around us, but and so we're able to go home, get recharged, get back to where we need to get, and then we're able to go back and be able to minister. And
so I know, like when we moved to Corpus, coming from California, it was a culture shock. It was different, didn't have a job, just struggling to survive and everything. But I know I would not trade those first 5 years of being in Corpus and hanging on by a thread and just going, God, have you really called me? And how are we going to provide? And this is this church really going to be something, that you want in Corpus? Corpus has a lot of great churches, and, why are we even here? But so often I've heard it said that God needs to mature the man before he matures the ministry, and
I believe that.
And early on, you watched God as you reached out and helped those that had no help. You watched God provide, right? Say a little bit about how you watched God provide in those early years, as he was really preparing for a huge step of faith we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. So we, in the beginning of our ministry, we really would just see where God would have us to go, and we would just go.
Right.
So we had, we would call it ADHD ministry, where we would work with street ministry, we would work with feeding programs. In Kenya, they have a lot of people living at the local dump. And so we'd go out there and we'd minister to these people. And we've seen people get healed at these places, and it's just incredible. And just many different ministries, orphanages. We would be here and we'd be there. We'd just be everywhere. And all these different ministries, we would do them everywhere. And God didn't ever have us in one place at one time.
Right.
And so we just see God just working through all of those places and providing the resources. In the very beginning, when we were doing our ministries, we would go to Kenya, and then I would come back home and I'd flip a house real quick and then gain a lot of money and then go back to Kenya. And we did that for about 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And it wasn't until the Lord said, are you going to let me do this, or are you going to just continue to keep trying to do this yourself?
Right.
And so when God said that to me, it's like, okay. And so then we became full-time, and we began to live in Kenya full-time. And
I just remember, you had a girl that was stuck in the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, we had
and
Lorraine.
You guys raised something like $40,000, and it was...
Yeah, it was a lot of money. It was
just such a step in faith, but this girl would have likely died if not been completely crippled for the rest of her life.
Oh, I know she would have died. There's no doubt. So that you're talking about Lorraine. Lorraine was, Tammy was doing a hospital ministry in Mombasa at a government hospital. I mean, we're talking about, sewer running through this place, cats, dog. I mean, it's just very, very horrible place. And she's in there doing ministry and just praying with people and just doing ministry in the hospital. And she meets this little girl named Lorraine. Mm-hmm. And this little girl was like 8 years old. And she was sitting in one spot for like 9 months. Mm. And she had been hit by a bus. And this bus had destroyed her legs. And anyway, we met her there, and Tammy and I began to pray about what can we do to help her? And so God told us to take her and take her to a government hospital, or to a private hospital. And we had no money. And we went and took her there, and we began to raise support for her. And I will tell you that she is in her last year of high school right now.
Nice.
And she is walking.
Yeah.
And she is beautiful. And it's just incredible how God has brought her through. We thought that she was never going to ever walk again. And all of her legs, she's able to walk. She walks with a limp.
Yeah.
But she walks with Jesus.
Yeah.
She's a beautiful girl. And
so God is using you guys to see her healed.
Right.
And to reveal God to her in a real tangible way.
Right.
At the same time, he's working on your faith.
Right.
So that was a step in faith.
It was.
And then, another woman had her legs run over by a train, and it goes on. And then, you step into this place and you're like, well, we're going to get this building and renovate it, Yeah. And that was like, so you're working with a group of young men kind of through another ministry. You're kind of doing all these random things, and you're working with individuals. And now God calls you to what you called the Dream Center.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that and the 500 Club.
Yeah, so when we first went to Kenya in 2013 with our family, we also, part of our service that we did, not only with Rafa House and all the things that Rafa House did, and actually the schools and everything, it was R4C Kenya, was Real for Christ Kenya that we were working with them, and then Rafa House Kenya. And so we were also working with a feeding program. And this feeding program, we would go and just feed the kids, and that's it. And it was beautiful. It was awesome. We had anywhere from 500 to 800 kids every Saturday. And over time, the founders of it asked us if we would lead a Bible study. And so that's where we got the name 500 Club.
Okay.
And so we named it 500 Club. And so what we did is we would come in early. All the kids would come early, and we would break up into Bible study groups. And we do Bible study with all of these kids. And then we do the feeding program.
And you're not checking them at the door. This is Muslims and
that's
everything.
Yeah. So when we were there, it was in the church. It was in a Utangi Baptist church. And so it was in the church. So Muslims can't go in the church. So we would have Muslims outside of the church, dancing outside to our Christian music,
right?
And they wouldn't be able to come in. And so through that process, God led us to rent a facility called the Dream Center. And it's a community center. And it's a community center. Now, it's not a church. And so now the Muslims can come inside.
Right.
And so, we have Muslims walking down the road that'll come walking right into the church or the community center. And the minute they walk in, they're meeting a believer in Christ. And they're
going into
Jesus.
a building in a neighborhood where the buildings aren't so nice, and certainly their homes are not nice. And they're walking into a place, and God taught you God's provision before you were even saved, and teaching you construction.
Yes.
Just absolutely provided.
Yeah,
the transformation of that place was amazing.
Well, the building itself, when we first rented it, you would look at it and think, oh, we should tear that down.
Oh, we saw pictures.
Yeah, and so that's the same with the school. We'll talk about later. But we walked in the very first day, and the whole thing was flooded. It's like, oh my gosh, what did we walk into? And so, but I had before we rented this place, I had a wrestling with God moment about all of the terms.
Right.
Like, how long are we going to rent this thing for? Because we were not registered charity at that time, so we can't buy a place. At that time, we had to rent only. And so he told me how much we're going to pay. He told me how long the term was going to be. He told me all of that, and I walked into the church, and I told them, and they agreed to every one of them.
Wow.
And so we have that place rented for 20 years.
Oh, nice.
And we're going in June, we'll be on our 4th year.
Nice.
And so we have 16 more years there.
Right.
And so when we walked in there, that place could have been torn down. And so on during a typical week, we're able to minister to over 700 people in that facility. And on Saturday is our biggest day.
Yeah.
So we get to the Dream Center at about 7:30 in the morning, and us as a team inside, which we had 30, 40 people sometimes that are working, that come in, and we do Bible study together, praise and worship together, and we prepare ourselves for going outside and being able to minister to the children. At 10 o'clock, we open the gates, and all the children come in. We do praise and worship for about 30 minutes, and then we break up into groups. We have 6 groups, so we divide all of these kids into 6 groups. And if you imagine chaos, but it's organized chaos, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so then we do Bible study, and we do games with them, and then we feed them, and then they go home. Right. But these kids will line up at 7 o'clock, and we don't open the gate till 10.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, what a blessing. And
yeah.
If you want to see Wayne dancing, you got to go to the get on an Andrus family mission.
It's a little scary,
it's
actually.
Great. Yeah. Well,
my wife always has this deer in the headlight look when I start dancing.
Yeah,
she's
but
like,
it's how they worship.
Yeah,
and it's the culture.
That's
know?
Right.
So it's a beautiful thing.
It is,
and they love you.
They
don't care how bad you dance.
Amen. Well, we get our exercise program and our praise and worship all at the same time.
Man. Good deal. So now the Dream Center is happening, and we were just so amazed at how successful that was, and just the manifest ways God uses that building. That building, like for us, we want to use our building a lot. So we, city wants to use our field out here for some things. We're like, hey, if it works out, it works out. We'd love for you to use our property, and you guys have done that to the utmost with this rental. And all, but now, you're having people start to sponsor individual kids to go to school, and the best thing, especially for the ones that live in the dump, is to be able to go and live at the school.
Right.
Yeah, and board at the school, boarding schools. And so, and knowing even the Christian schools are harsh, right? That's what you related to us. It's just, part of the culture and the way they do things. And so now all of a sudden you show up and you have this vision for a school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we, during the process of the Dream Center, and even before that, and it all really started with Lorraine, the one that was hit by the bus.
Right.
We began a sponsorship program. And we had probably about 17 kids that we were helping to go to school and sponsoring, helping their families and things like that. And at the Dream Center, for their first year and a half, 2 years, we had school going on there. And so we had 3 teachers at the Dream Center for the first year and a half, and they would teach these 17 kids. And so on Saturday, we would see kids coming to the Dream Center. And we'd be like, these kids, a lot of them are not eating. They're being abused in ways that you and I could not even understand. And I came from pretty harsh abuse as a child. Okay. And these abuses were just in front of us, and we could see them all the time.
Any culture without Jesus is going to go there.
Exactly.
It's not just unique to Kenya, but any culture without Jesus, and he can transform any culture.
Exactly.
But go ahead.
And so we saw this every Saturday, and we were giving them a good meal on Saturday, and they walked away happy on Saturday, but we were worried about them the other 6 days of the week. Mm-hmm. And so
these kids weren't just a photo op. Like your hearts are there.
Yeah. These kids, we know these kids.
Yes.
We know all
so
of
important.
These kids. Yeah. And so God revealed to us about opening a school. Mm-hmm. And so, and we, from the very beginning, felt like God wanted us to open a boarding school.
Right.
So that we could have a boarding school for kids to come to a safe place, to come to a place where they can have food. They can be in a safe place. They can be clean, and they can just have. We actually work with our children in counseling things, trauma, all of these things on a daily basis. And so we felt like God wanted us to do this, and so we began praying about a school. Began looking around, and God pointed us to a school 7-minute walk from the Dream Center, from the community center that we have. And when we first went over there, this is an all-Muslim school. Mm-hmm. I mean, you walk in there, and there's Muslims everywhere. And even on the chalkboard, it said how ridiculous it is to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Mm. And now it's how ridiculous not to believe. Amen?
Right.
And so we walk into the school, and we see this, and God just said, this is it. Mm-hmm. And so then we through all of this process, we were able to get our charity in Kenya. We have a charity in America. We have one in Kenya. And so in order to buy any property, we can buy it now through the charity.
Right.
And so, it took us a little while, but we worked out all the terms, and we were able to close on the school November 6th, 2023. So the first year, we had about 700 applicants to come to the school that wanted to come to the school. And God led us to 111 the first year. And so what we did was we had meetings with all of these 700 applicants. And in this, probably 50% of them are Muslim that would come to this meeting. And at those meetings, I was able to have a meeting with all of these people and tell them about Jesus Christ. And so the entire community knows that we are transitioning this school from a Muslim school to Jesus school. And so anyway, God led us to 111 the first year, and we just put the word out there that we were doing this, and we all of these kids were sponsored within no time whatsoever.
Right.
And so when we got to school, it was like ancient ruins, also kind of like the Dream Center.
Right.
And God provided all the finances for us to rebuild the school, and for us to pay the first 2 payments, and all the registrations and all the legalities behind everything are all paid for. And so this year, in January 2025, we have 174 children, and all but like 12 of them are sponsored. And now our heart was to open up boarding, and this year we opened up boarding.
For how many?
And we have 13 girls, and 13 girls that are probably our highest risk girls. We have girls that were being sold for, prostitution. We have girls that were being on drugs and alcohol, and we have girls that have trauma. And the cool thing about it is we have a counselor who is going to psychology school. We have a lady who's our matron who, she's got to be a counselor. She doesn't have qualifications, but she is phenomenal.
So much of counseling. You actually learn by doing.
Right.
Loving the Lord and His Word first.
And then we have another lady who's actually a counselor at the place. And then our director, he is amazing. He is amazing. And he's a pastor. We have a Calvary Chapel in Mombasa, and he's the pastor of that church.
Nice.
And he's also our director of the school.
Wow.
And so we're able to have counseling for these girls. And, we have our girls' dorm done. We have our boys' dorm done. And next year, Lord willing, we'll start our boys.
So how do people keep up? First of all, I know that's not the end for you because you have continued vision.
Yes.
And you let it out. It's like, okay, just I tell people, I go, you want to sponsor some missionaries and all and the work they're doing. I feel like if we give you $1, it becomes 10 at least. And I know it's God's doing, but it's just amazing your willingness. And so how does someone further be in contact with your ministry?
So our ministry is we would love for you to come. We'd love for a person to come on a mission trip. People ask me all the time, would you rather us come or would you rather us give? And I'm like, well, I'd rather you come, because after you come, you're going to give.
That's
and so for us, the way that you can get involved with us is we do have a Andrus Family Mission Facebook page.
So Andrus Family
Missions,
ANDRUS.
Family Mission Facebook page. And then we have a website, and we are actually meeting with the website designer tomorrow. We're redoing our website, and that is Go Send Join Us. Send Join Us.
Yeah.
And so that's us.
Yeah.
And our
email. So if you forget any of that, we are also you're connected to a lot of churches, but home church is here, Calvary Chapel.
Calvary Chapel of the Coastlands is our home church.
Look that up as well.
And you can get on there, and you'll see us on the missions page. At Calvary Chapel.
So one last thing, I do remember, right, that you at one time you were like, yeah, the finances, and you were asking just for people outside, and we had this conversation. I said, Wayne, some people, if you ask for people to give, well, one, it's a good thing. People will always judge that, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, the vast majority of the church, just like us sending out, a young couple that were discipled here who are in the military, right?
Right.
We send them as missionaries into the military.
Right.
And so we get credit, right? Like the Bible, certainly through David's experience of those staying home and protecting the home as others went out to battle, they all got the same reward, right?
Right, right.
And so I remember, talking to you and saying, Wayne, let people know that they can sponsor this, and
Right.
don't be selfish with the blessings. Like basically, and when people are giving to something like this, one, it's a blessing to be a part of what you're doing. But then they're also praying.
Yeah.
And they will visit, or if they can't come, I mean, it's a long trip, then they sponsor others to come.
That's
I think
right.
we have like 17, maybe more.
Yeah, we have 17 coming in May.
Soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a big amount of money, but
That's a big group.
but they don't. They're coming by the blessings of others.
Yeah.
Pouring into it as well, and so that that heart that says, yeah, I want for you. I want the church to be involved in something that's really good, because I watch people that get involved, and you're not a ministry where we never hear from you. I mean,
Right.
Tammy is incredible with keeping us up to date.
Yeah.
And every so often she sends me a funny picture of you dancing, which is great. It's worth the sponsorship. But anyways, but that whole idea of, you go and we send.
That's right.
And that's the teamwork, and
We are
that's
a
just
team,
the huge
for
blessing.
sure.
And so for you guys to know, Wayne and Tammy were already involved in Mombasa. We're already hearing about it. But when they went full time, they actually started coming to church here. And so we're like, man, you've been set up by so many other people, but we're so blessed, to be your sending church.
Yes.
And how sweet that was. And our friendship has actually remained good.
Yeah. Amen. Yes.
It's
So for us, being in Mombasa and having a sending church, having a church that we know that is there, that is praying for you, that is part of it, not just financially,
right.
but just knowing that they care and that they're
Right.
part of your ministry is so important.
Mm-hmm.
We're in Kenya. We're 9-hour difference. You feel like you're in a whole nother world by yourself.
Right.
But because we have a sending church, Calvary Chapel of the Coastlands, we know we're not alone.
Yeah, and just the
amazing.
nature of our church is, some of my best friends in ministry are not Calvary Chapel. It's teamwork.
Yeah, it is.
It very much is, and so that is really our heart.
Yeah.
And so anybody that wants to be involved, you'll be ministered to. You'll be blessed by just watching, these incredible steps of faith that
Amen.
Peculiar people.
That's right.
Taking their walks. So
Definitely peculiar.
anyways, anything else you'd like to say before we close?
No, I would just like to say thank you and thank the church and just, a lot of people are like, why Kenya? I'm like, why not? I'm like, we
Exactly.
get to serve Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to serve him every day of our life.
Right.
Even when we're back in the Corpus or back in the States or wherever we're at, we have opportunities to share Christ with everyone around us.
Nice.
And that's what we want to do.
Praise God.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.
Amen. Thank
God
you,
bless
brother.
you, man.